What I don't think you should do is have a financial system that is set up to extinguish risk.
And we're number one for international debt issuance. So yes, I guess we are going to attract some crime, and we do work to get that crime out.
What is your response to that? That yes, we want to keep people safe, but we also need to protect people's privacy online.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a nice break over lunch. I'm delighted to be joined by City Minister Tulip Siddiq. I was just going to say you've been in role since being Shadow City Minister and have continued. And I'm particularly delighted that I've just found out that this is the first live interview I believe you've done. So I feel honoured. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, as this is the first live interview you've done, I mean, how have the past 3 to 4 months been? How has the journey from Shadow City Minister to City Minister gone?
It's been a massive leap, if you like. And I know it sounds like a really obvious thing to say. And people said it to me before as well. And I think I mentioned to you before when we were talking that I'm still quite friendly with the city ministers that came before me, which might be quite unusual for some politicians. But I think because the city role is quite apolitical in a sense, and it's more about financial regulation than trying to score political points, if you like. So I've stayed in touch with them, and all of them said to me before I became elected, I guess they saw the writing on the wall, so they knew I was probably going to become city minister, that you have no time to think. And that's exactly how it's felt over the last few months. Like, in opposition, you had more time to think. That's why I wrote the financing growth paper, because I had time to think. There's no way I could write that now, because I just moved from one thing to another. And so I guess it's the speed of things. It's also, there's so many things you want to get done, and obviously things take time. Whereas in opposition, you're saying it, you're not really executing it. So I guess that's been my experience, but it's also been absolutely amazing because we waited for 14 years, and I've been an MP for 10 years next year, all of it in opposition. So being in government, whole different experience.
Yes, and I'm not just saying this, but there has been a lot. I mean, we've certainly been busy as journalists over the last few months in the financial services sphere. So that obviously goes to show that a lot has been going on. And one thing I particularly like to chat about is Mansion House. So that was delivered by Chancellor Rachel Reeves a couple of weeks ago. I think one of the key messages for the city was this one of, renewed risk-taking, that perhaps the post-crisis regulations have gone a bit too far, that we should see a bit more, there's been unintended consequences. And obviously growth is such a big buzzword for the Labour Party. Is it possible to kind of achieve that growth and to take a bit more risk, encourage the regulators to, require the regulators to encourage firms and consumers to take more risk, but not kind of take a step back to 2008?
Okay, so we discussed this a lot, as you can imagine. Rachel and I and the Treasury team discussed this a lot before Mansion House. And we've been thinking about the global financial crisis, obviously, and Gordon Brown actually came into the Treasury a couple of weeks ago to talk to all of us, came back to his old office, and it was great. It was an amazing moment, but it really reminded us that things have moved on. Like, we are at the final stages in terms of, for example, Basel 3.1 feels like it's sort of the final step after the global financial crisis. COVID is over, hopefully. Things have settled down. There seems to be some sort of stability in the country. This is a time to reset the relationship we have in the city and to take some risk. We feel the risk appetite is just too kind of low in our country. So the Chancellor and I, what we are trying to say when we talk about increasing the risk appetite is that certain measures were taken which were the right measures at the time in the global financial crisis. And everyone did everything they could to save our economy and save the city. But we don't feel they're all necessary anymore. There's obviously got to be a balanced approach. Like, I'm not talking about a race to the bottom, sort of deregulation, let's just leave it all out there. This is about taking small risks which are responsible, sort of proportionate regulation. And I can give you a few examples of the ones that we discussed as well. But just to like really put it on the record, what we're trying to do is increase the risk appetite, increase responsible risk taking to grow the economy, which is the central mission. And you journalists are sick of hearing us, right? The growth mission, that's what we keep talking about. You're sick of, someone was saying to me, it's Labour bingo. Everywhere we go, it's like investment, reform, growth. And I said, well, it's working, that means, if you're repeating those back to me. But there's a few examples that we want to think about. Like, for example, the senior managers regime and the certification regime. There was a reason why it was put in. It was right for the time. But now we feel it's becoming a bit of a bureaucratic burden. And we feel like that's something we could look at and change and remove. Have you heard about this, like how we are an outlier in Europe when it comes to deferral pay schemes? And that's something the banks have brought up with me repeatedly. So if we can change that, then does that mean we attract more talent? Does it mean we're more competitive on the world stage? And then you would have heard me in Financing Growth, which you know well because I spoke to you about it, is looking at the FCA rulebook, which apparently, if it's printed out, is bigger than you and bigger than me, like in terms of height, because it's just so many pages in there.
Yeah.
I mean, can we look at those rules, strip out some of the rules which are duplicate, which we don't need anymore, overlap with consumer duty? Like, at what point can we start giving a bit more flexibility to the firms who want to operate in our city and our financial services? You might ask, I kind of anticipated, what happens when things go wrong, right? And the truth is, you can never have a system where nothing will ever go wrong. I mean, I would be very naive if I thought that. There's always going to be a time, but we've just got to be responsible about it and not take risk to the other side where there'll be, a huge collapse. So we've just got to be a bit responsible. But we do feel it has had unintended consequences. We think we're far enough from that now. We feel like we're entering a period of stability. This is the time to do it. So that's our thinking.
Okay, that's a really helpful answer. And you've pledged to kind of work closely with city firms. You described your approach to rulemaking as kind of co-design being a key word. Do you feel that firms can be trusted not to just push for kind of wholesale deregulation? Do you feel like you and your team and as well the government have kind of a good relationship with the private sector? You can trust them to not take things too far?
It's taken a very long time to build up that relationship. I'd be lying if I didn't say, I mean, all the stuff you read about the charm offences is true, right? We did do that. We did go out on a limb because we had a period in the Labour Party, as anyone in this room will know, where it didn't feel like we were very friendly with business. It didn't feel like it didn't feel like we wanted to speak to the city, and those years were difficult. Keir then came in, and Keir was absolutely certain right from day one, and as you say, I was Shadow City Minister then, and with the Shadow Chancellor, that we've got to build up this relationship. It's got to be open. And so Rachel and I started going and speaking to everyone we possibly could. Of course, people will put their interests first, but and talk to us about things. But what we've done is, I suppose, filtered the things that we feel. So if lots of people are telling you the same thing, that's the point where you think, okay, we've got to do something about this. Nearly everything that came in the Mansion House speech came from industry. For example, the Digital Guild, which you know about, we're calling it DIGIT, which is a very sexy acronym. But the Digital Guild and the thing we're working through, the Digital Security Sandbox, and trying to get this issuance done, came from industry. Like every person we spoke to, and whether that was UK finance and the trade bodies, or whether that was banks, whether it was anyone from the city, all the stakeholders were saying to us, something's got to be done on Digital Guild, something's got to be done on the sandboxes. And so we listened to them. So I guess, in answer to your question, we've been around long enough where we know that someone's telling us something that will just work in their favour and not in the city's favour. And then there's like everyone in the city telling you the same thing. And everyone in the city has complained to us about fraud, for example, which is a major topic. Everyone has said we've got to look at the National Payments Vision, which was done by Joe Garner. And another example of it being, this role being quite apolitical, that review was started by my predecessor's predecessor and the previous administration, but being delivered by us, because it's a genuinely good review about how we transform our payments landscape and the ecosystem and account-to-account transfer. So I guess we would listen to the industry if everyone was telling us the same thing. There have been some suggestions which, Rachel and I have been like, okay, that's your idea, but then we've tested it with other people and said no, and that's the idea of co-design.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And speaking of things that the industry likes and dislikes, one of the, I would argue, probably most hated policy proposals out there at the moment is the FCA's bid to name firms that are under investigation. So people like to call that the name and shame plans. So this morning they put out their latest thinking, and the idea is that it goes ahead, but with some caveats. So firms have 10 days to say to the FCA, actually, we haven't done anything wrong, please don't name us. The FCA will take some more factors into account before naming those companies. The feedback we've got, even in the 3 hours since those proposals have been out, is that this hasn't gone far enough. Firms are still pretty upset. It would make the UK an outlier, supposedly. I know you have actually kind of spoken on this topic before. I wonder whether you think these changes are enough?
So when the proposals first came out, this name and shame, for a start, the narrative around it was really bad, right? And it didn't land well with industry. And I think the messaging around it was dreadful, and it worried people. It really worried people. And if there's anything we've learned for the last few years, is that you can't cause this sort of instability. And we want to give people the confidence to invest in our country if we want to deliver this central mission of growth. And these proposals didn't fill people with confidence, and they didn't feel they could be in this scheme. So I did raise it with the FCA a couple of times. It is a matter from them at the end of the day. They are the regulators. But Parliament holds the regulators to account. So I raised it with them several times. Industry told me repeatedly that they felt it was too hostile, that it wasn't done in the right way, reputationally could cause lots of damage. Industry also brought me cases where they didn't feel it was appropriately handled. So I have raised it with the FCA several times. They did, and obviously I meet regularly with them, as you can imagine. They did say they would look at it again. From the sounds of it, they have watered down some of the proposals. I guess it's now wait and see. Let's see how it goes from here. From what I did gather from the FCA and having the conversations, is that the number of firms per year is actually very low who get caught in this enforcement, just so you know. But what I will say, and I said this in opposition, I say this in government, just the messaging was really wrong in the way it was done. Like, we don't want people to operate in our financial services sector and be worried all the time. So, yeah, and the rulemaking, obviously, there's a lot, we know there's lots of rules that they have to abide by, lots of regulation, which is why we've asked for the rule book to be slimmed down. So we're aware of that.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then, I mean, kind of carrying on that theme, we can talk about the UK's position in the wider world. Labour Party has been very vocal about a Brexit reset, so resetting our relations with the EU. That, I mean, has been welcomed kind of across the board. But what specifically does that mean for the City of London, for financial services?
I should say right from the start, because I'm being interviewed by a journalist, we're not going back into the European Union, right? So just making it clear in case there's a headline somewhere, just because everyone knows how I voted and how I campaigned. So just to say, we're not going back in. However, we do really feel there's a need to not ramp up this divisive rhetoric, okay? And we do feel there's a real need to reset this relationship. They are our closest trading partners. We've got to have a good relationship with them if we want our financial services to grow. There's no question about that. So what I'm doing at the moment is, for a start, I met outgoing Commissioner McGuinness, had a very good constructive meeting with her. I will be meeting the new Commissioner Maria, who's coming in quite soon, to talk about shared interests and how do we make sure we do talk to each other. But I'm also doing a series of statutory instruments. Parliamentary time, it's quite hard to get parliamentary time to get a huge bill through, like the Financial Services and Markets Act. But you can do small legislative changes, which makes it easier. So some of the SIs I've done have been based around how do we get this relationship a bit smoother, have access to trade. And, it's about making sure it works for the EU as well as working for us as well. The Chancellor's also going, I think it's next month, to the meeting of the financial ministers for the Eurogroup, and she's going to that as well. But, if you think, not being facetious, but if you think about the last few people who are in charge of managing our relationship with the EU, was Boris Johnson, and then Liz Truss, and then, I'm just saying, I do think Keir Starmer will do a better job, and I think I'll do a better job in trying to make sure we have this constructive relationship. So we just cannot ignore the EU, is our point, and we have to make sure that it works for us, works for them, but for financial services, absolutely crucial. So I won't bore you with the details of the SIs, but if anyone's interested, that's what we're trying to do, have some kind of back and forth in the most constructive way possible without having a huge bill go through Parliament.
Okay, I think if we had more time, I would definitely look to go through those, but maybe we can take
The
that
audience,
offline.
wouldn't they?
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone wants to hear about every SI I've done.
I mean, one not necessarily legislation, but kind of one policy approach that is interesting in relation to the EU is equivalence. Now, you know, since we left the EU, they've given the City of London, they've given financial services one area of equivalence. So that's for CCPs, for clearinghouses. That expires in June 2025. So, I mean, that'll come around very quickly. Will you be seeking in your conversations with the new Commissioner for Financial Services an extension of that?
I guess it's a matter for them at the end of the day, but I'll discuss it with her. Yeah, it's the truth of it. I will discuss it, but I don't know which way they're going. But there's no topic is off the table, really, when it comes to that. And I've got to speak to her generally about what does she see as the relationship going forward. Like, Commissioner McGuinness was very clear that this had to be a stronger relationship than it had been in the past. I'm sure this new commissioner will have the same sort of attitude, but I don't know, it's the truth. So I have to meet with her and speak to her. But anything we can do to help this ebb and flow of the financial services sector and get us access to some of the things that we had access to when we were in the European Union, I'm going to try and get the best deal for our country, I suppose. So yeah, I'm also planning a visit to Brussels quite soon.
Okay.
To try and speak to everyone and remind them that we are a new government and we do want to have a good relationship with them.
Yeah, so do you feel kind of there are endless opportunities now that in the UK, the Labour government's in power, and in the EU, we're about to have a new commission take place. So it's kind of, it's new on both sides of the channel.
I think there was so much sort of, the whole referendum became so toxic, didn't it? And then the fallout afterwards and some of the rhetoric that came out and the narrative that came out from the government, I do really think we need to put it behind us. There's no doubt about that. I think there is a chance for a reset in terms of relationship building. You've seen the Prime Minister go over there. You've seen, how he's made huge approaches. There's no doubt about that. I think there's time for a reset. But I also just go back to what I said. I think we are entering, thankfully, a period of stability just because of all the things we've gone through, like the war, COVID. It feels like the end of the global financial crisis, like I said. I mean, think about the number of prime ministers and chancellors we had, one after another. Think about the snap elections we had. Like, I fought 4 elections in 10 years. I mean, that's not normal, right? So just got into office, straight away another election. And the financial services sector keeps saying to me, look, the financial cycles don't operate in the same way as political cycles, and you've got to be aware of that. And they would sometimes say to me, I hope you're not going to get into office and then rip up all the work that we've done and rip up like the future regulatory framework and just rip up everything. And I said, no, of course we wouldn't do that. And they were like, we just don't know. So I think that's what we're trying to provide, some sort of stability in terms of, look, you can go about your job because otherwise we're not growing the economy, and it's desperately needed. One thing the Chancellor said to me constantly is that financial services cannot be seen in isolation. She said it's got to feed into the wider picture of growing the economy. So she holds me, she kind of does come and say to me, these are the metrics, have you met all of them? So we do have weekly bilats where she'll go through, have you delivered this, have you delivered that? So, I mean, yeah, it's... let's just say the night before I do prep for it. But
Imagine.
She wants to make sure that anything we unlock the opportunity for is feeding into the overall narrative. So I guess in answer to your question, I do feel there is a reset. Yeah, there's an opportunity for a reset.
And I feel like I do have to ask, because obviously the UK is, the government is seeking to grow the economy. We heard this morning that, potential tariffs, if Trump does impose kind of across the board tariffs, that that could have a big hit on the UK economy. Is that something that the Treasury is thinking about very deeply as well? Obviously, the Department for Business and Trade thinking about this a lot, but is that something that could potentially undermine this new bid for growth?
So the Chancellor would rather we didn't have tariffs. She said it'll be expensive for people in this country and in the US, for all consumers. So it won't just be expensive for us, be expensive for them as well. She really does want, and we really do want, free trade agreement between the two countries. I guess it's a wait and watch situation at the moment. We will work very closely with the Trump administration. They're obviously a huge sort of investment partnership with us, exceeding $1 trillion, our partnership with them. So there's no doubt about not working with them. But I have to say, with the tariffs, we really want to concentrate on this free trade agreement that we have and operating. We want that with the whole country, not just with America. But yeah, I guess it's wait and watch now. But yeah. Let's see what they do. If you hear anything, let us know.
Oh, absolutely. We will. As soon as we hear anything, we'll be writing about it. We've got loads of questions come through, so I'm just going to take some of these. One thing actually that would be good to touch on is crypto. So I believe it was last week, but I keep getting my dates wrong, that you gave a speech on crypto saying that you will regulate for stablecoins and crypto at the same time next year. You'll provide kind of draft legislation on that. It would be great just to kind of get your vision on, where you think crypto is going. Does it need tougher regulation? Are you able to kind of strike that balance between allowing consumers to, trade if they want to, but also making sure that it's kind of done safely?
Yeah. So I think with crypto, there was a time when it was a small group of people using it. And what I've become more and more aware of is that there are people in the city who are using crypto, that's fine. But I am having, as a constituency MP, like young men from the South Kilburn estate saying to me, I've been trying to make some money. So the truth is, there's got to be some regulatory framework for all these activities that protects people from all walks of life who are using it. That's what's informed my thinking. So we've got to be very careful in terms of market abuse. I think that's one of the things. Fraud, obviously, there's like huge fraud here as well. You've seen from very famous cases in America, you could lose all your money, essentially. So for us as a government, is just trying to bring in some sort of moderation, some sort of regulation. There's some recommendations which were done last year, and they were around crypto assets and also stable coins. I know people have asked why we're doing it separately because they wanted us to legislate for stable coins earlier. I do think it's just more efficient to do it all together, but we will be legislating. Well, I guess I say legislating, providing a framework. That's what we would want to be doing. We have a consultation open at the moment, so people should be feeding into it. But I want to get this right. I feel like it's here to stay, and it got a much wider airing through the US elections than anyone thought. And people are more and more interested in it. It's become a topic of conversation, much more in my engagement than ever before. And I want to make sure we get it right in terms of the regulatory framework that we provide for it. So the consultation will finish, I'll see what the industry have to say, and then it'll be next year.
Okay. And I just want to ask very briefly about the regulators themselves. There's been a question here. The previous government handed significant policy-making powers to the FCA without significant enhanced scrutiny mechanisms. That's their wording, not mine. Will the new government continue with this approach or take back some power? And I'd like to ask that in the context of the national payments vision as well, because you mentioned that earlier. We've had a look through, noticed that some of the kind of previous powers that the PSR had are perhaps being handed to the FCA. Is that a vote of confidence in the FCA? Do you think it's really doing its job well after Brexit, or is it more that we need to kind of reduce what the PSR is up to, particularly after kind of controversy around the fraud reimbursement policy?
I think my response to that in terms of regulators, so let me start from what you said at the beginning. The regulators work for us, right? And Parliament has to hold them to account. And for me, I have been holding the regulators to account mostly on this competitive and growth, objective, the secondary objective, which we backed when we were in opposition, and it is definitely the right thing to do. I don't think it's enough, let's put it this way, for them to just issue a letter once in a while to Parliament, which they've done, and they did put the metrics and how they're dealing with it and achieving the metrics fine. It's not enough. Basically, I'm not going to wait till next July to find out whether actually they're delivering on the secondary objective like I want them to, which is the fundamental thing right now. So there's a number of things. First of all, they've got to do the rule book thing that I've mentioned. We meet with them regularly and they have to tell me what the metrics are. We are doing things like reforming the FOS, the Financial Ombudsman Service. And one of the things I really want the FCA to do is clarify the relationship between the FOS and the FCA, because part of what you're describing in terms of regulatory congestion, which is one of the phrases people love using, is what's the role of the FCA? What are their rules and how do we interpret them and the clarity around it? And then the role of the FOS, right? So that's one of the things that we've got to do. In terms of PSR and APP fraud, there was obviously lots of conversations, as you saw, leading up to it. The latest report I had sounds like it's working according to plan, but I will keep tabs on that and find out how it's going. But in terms of the regulators, I'm not sure if the right question is, do they have too much power, blah, blah, blah. I think the question is, how do we simplify it and make the regulators work for industry? Because clearly at the moment, there are people saying that it's not working for them in terms of innovation, in terms of there's too many rules, there's not enough clarity, the name and shame, which you mentioned. There's obviously, and then lots of concerns that have been raised about people who've struggled. I understand all of that, and I think for me, my role at the moment is to make sure the regulators realise that they are concerns, they need to take them on board, and they need to clarify their position.
Yes.
So I don't know if this means a whole host of people who've entered.
Yes, I think unfortunately we are out of time. It's been a really great chat. I just wondered if there's anything else you wanted to end on, any policies that you feel you're particularly proud of, that you're looking forward to enacting, either at the start of 2025 or before the end of the year, just before we finish off.
I guess what I would say is that we're doing the industrial strategy, and I'm really pleased because one of the pillars that's been identified as an area for growth is financial services. And Rachel has been absolutely clear. This is not going to be me and civil servants sitting in a dark room in Treasury writing this financial services review, the first one we've ever had. It's got to be co-designed with industry. And some of the things I'm looking at, which, if anyone wants to feed in, the Women in Finance Charter, we've really tried to reinvigorate, is one of the things. We have Amanda Black chairing it, and we had a reception in number 11. So in terms of what do we do when it comes to increasing women in finance, but also economic abuses, which is another thing that I'm working on at the moment. In terms of our capital markets, we'll need another session to cover everything that's happening in capital markets, but how do we get people to IPO here?
Yes.
And Pisces, which is you've heard about Pisces, have you? Yeah, we're very proud of it. It's like the first time we've ever done anything like it, which in a controlled environment, private companies will be trading in intermittent windows. The digital guilt, which I've already mentioned, but I'm just trying to look at everything that's been mentioned in Mansion House, but also the areas for growth. And we haven't even got onto banking and, banking hubs and things like that, and getting people online. And then underpinning all of this is our huge financial inclusion strategy and our financial resilience and our pensions investment, trying to make people realise they can do more with their money. When we talk about risk-taking, people investing their money, we just don't have a culture of it. So how do we reset that when it comes to pensions, when it comes to people taking some risk with their money, but being confident that the system will reward them? So please feed in is my final say on the matter. The call for input is till the 12th of December, and then we start writing the strategy next year until spring.
Great. Well, that's a really good message to end on, and I can see why you say you don't have much time to think. So it sounds like there's quite a lot going on. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And the next session will be moderated by Hannah and is on the city from abroad. So please do stick around. Thank you very much.